Well, hello, founders. Welcome to another episode of the Gab Lab, a show that's designed to provide you with financial intelligence that will not only blow your mind, but that will build your bottom line. I'm your show host, Tanya Woods Richardson, and our episode champion for this round is Community Futures of Saskatchewan. They have 13 offices across the province to help founders build their business and nail their numbers. That's what it's all about. So today's episode, we have Neil Jones with us. Thank you for being here, Neil. Neil is the Senior Vice President of Financial Recovery Services for BDO Canada. And Neil, you have, dare I say, an alphabet after your name. We've got CPA, LIT, CIRP. I am wondering, because this is important to our founders today, understanding a little bit about those designations and what that means for them. So CPA.
I might get in trouble if I actually get some of these wrong. CPA is Chartered Professional Accountant.
Beautiful, check.
Yeah, check there. CIRP is I'm a Chartered Insolvency Restructuring Professional. And LIT, I'm a licensed trustee, licensed insolvency trustee. Yeah.
So the insolvency word, I know, is going to hit a few bells for people listening in. This episode, in case anybody wants to know, if you haven't guessed it yet, this is all about stress testing our numbers, stress testing our finances, because I know there's a lot of stress out there right now for founders. And Neil's with us today to kind of walk us through the process that he uses, because I imagine there is uncertainty. A lot of you are feeling uncertain and you just don't even know what to do or how to deal with it. So, Neil, when with that word insolvency, can you kind of clarify that process, not necessarily the process, but what that would mean to a founder?
Yeah, so essentially, when people think about a chartered insolvency and restructuring professional or a licensed trustee, they often think about liquidation. So, a receivership where assets are liquidated for the benefit of creditors, or a bankruptcy. But often restructuring professionals get involved in what I call turnaround work. So essentially, we may be approached by a company, a debtor that is struggling, and we would basically do financial analysis of their operations and their financials to determine, I guess, potential paths forward, what restructuring options may be available to them. So I guess my message there would be we have a lot of experience with turnaround work as well.
Beautiful. And I think it's important. I know when we start getting into liquidation and receivership, I think for the founders to kind of wrap their head around, there's definitely things you can do, right, as a founder to be proactive in the situation versus just reactive. The receivership, that's something more that a lender's going to take action on, right, to kind of hit the button and try to recoup whatever expenses they can from that loan. So I so appreciate you being here, because I think what's really important for founders to take away from this is you don't need to wait for things to happen to you. You can take ownership of this process, regardless of what it's going to look like, but taking ownership of it and being aware of the steps involved so that you can get rid of that fear and stress.
You can definitely be proactive.
Yeah.
And essentially, when I was asked about this episode, stress testing financials, I kind of like to think of it as a health check for financials. But essentially, I'm going to outline what I look for and the process I go through when I help a company with a potential turnaround. And I think it will be helpful for your founders to, I guess, hear that process, because they should be able to replicate that internally in-house to make sure they stay on top of their the financial health of their company.
Well, Neil, you've led us into the segue perfectly, because I love to frame it for founders listening. As always, with every episode, we break it down into 3 different segments so that it's not 60 minutes of content that you're going to have to listen to all at once. So, Neil, you're first going to walk us through what you call, this is your process, but scenario analysis. So taking a look at kind of what's happening right now and the what ifs of what could happen down the road and how that would impact our bottom line, because our through line is always bottom line on this show. And then the second segment is going to be about some of the key ratios, so better understanding our present situation and what's that looking like and any possible flags there. And then the third segment is kind of this reinvention or restructuring some of the options that entrepreneurs or founders might have at their disposal to restructure if needed, if they can't manage and mitigate what they currently have. Correct?
Correct. Good.
Okay. All right. And in speaking with you, one of the things that, I kind of took away from our last conversation, I've been giving it lots of thought, is, your work is, it's not for the faint of heart, first of all. And thank you for what you do. Because as we were talking about, you're like an ER doctor, right? And triage. People aren't coming to you when everything's great. People are coming to you when there's pain points and a lot of frustration and a lot of pain. And I think what's important through all of this too for founders, I've got my behavioral finance hat on right now, but as human beings, we're typically not motivated to do the work we need to do until our back is against the wall, until we're in the corner. And COVID it did not cause the financial fragility that we're seeing now across the country. It just exposed it. So I see this as a learning opportunity for founders to actually really get to the heart of their numbers, what their numbers have been saying all along, and to find a way to build going forward, to rebuild, so that there's some financial viability and success and traction there, and will allow them to weather the storms that come along. But Lord forbid, not another pandemic. I don't think we can do that. All right.
Well, it's a lot of times, what I'm going to explain is going to take some rolling up your sleeves and get your hands dirty a little bit in Excel. That might scare some people, but it's also a great tool to help with financial planning. And I often tell people, the most complicated calculation I do in a day is probably division. So it's not, the calculations aren't that hard. It's more or less just trying to understand what the numbers mean.
Yes, that's a good point. Excel does all the formulations, right? You've got the calculations, but understanding those and then interpreting the data.
Exactly.
You're right? Like interpreting the data and understanding what it means. Okay, so step 1 for you. Founder comes in, pain point, I'm feeling stressed, I don't know what to do. You talk about situation analysis. So what does that look like?
Before I get into scenario analysis, essentially the first thing I would look at is trends for the company's financial performance. And when I say financial performance, what I mean is essentially analyzing their income statement for a period of time. Usually that's, to find trends, you want at least 3 years, but if the data is available, you want to go as far as 5 years if you can. So essentially plotting your income statement in Excel over a 3 or 5 year period and really try to understand the trends. So, when you have this Excel worksheet built, break it down as much as you can. That's, as much as reasonably can be performed. It could be, by division. It could be by major product lines. It could be, company as a whole. But the more detail you have, generally, the more, I guess, detailed financial information you'll have to make those decisions.
Can I ask you 2 questions there, Neil?
Sure.
So the first question, when you're saying breaking it down, I think oftentimes our expenses are broken down, but are you referring to like our revenue streams or our profit centers, really understanding what's generating revenue, what our top line is in that space?
What I'm referring to usually is, and internals may be different than external financials, but I would start with the breakdown from your reviewed or audited statements.
Okay.
year by year for 3 or 5 years. If
Okay.
the financial information is available for a further breakdown for, by revenue for product line, division, so on, you can use that. But generally, I start with reviewed or audited financials.
Okay. And then my second question, when I think of income statement, I typically think of it's like an annual snapshot, right? Comparison over a period of time. So I'm thinking year by year by year. Do you want to see more of the detailed breakdown? Are you looking more for the historical cash flow to see what was happening quarter over quarter, month over month, or is year by year fine? What do you do?
Year by year, I think is fine for past financial information.
Okay.
When I think about stress testing financials, it's hard to think about a more important ratio or ratios than gross margin and operating profit margin.
Profit margin.
If you have sound gross margin and profit margin consistently, you're generally going to have a healthy business. But essentially, I would plot out the historical performance, understanding revenues, understanding direct expenses, understanding overhead, so you're getting that gross margin percentage and profit margin percentage, and really understand trends. So, say year 3 to 4 revenues went up. Why did they go up? Understanding those past trends will really help you understand potentially, how to avoid any of those hiccups in the future. Might also give you some ideas about opportunities about improving your income statement as well.
I think that's huge. I think that being able to articulate why numbers have done what they've done, up or down. I know some of the clients that I've worked with, I see this beautiful little bucket called miscellaneous or other expenses, both in revenue and expenses, and then trying to get the founder to articulate, well, what is that? It's, usually it's the deer in the headlights look. Yeah. And I'm going to apologize in advance because I know some people are going to be like, oh my gosh, why are we doing this? I just want to clarify, gross profit, right, is the number when we take all of our income, we subtract our cost of goods or our direct costs, we're left with gross profit. And then from that, we subtract our operating expenses. Then we're left with net profit, AKA the bottom line. And I'm a big fan of that bottom line. People can talk all they want to me about top line or, oh yeah, our gross profit is this. And I just want to see that bottom line to make sure that everything's adding up, because if the bottom line isn't there, the business isn't there. So.
And the main reason I get into past financial results when it comes to income statement is to really understand, are there areas of financial difficulty? Yes. Is pricing being squeezed due to competition? Are direct expenses increasing over time due to, pricing from suppliers? But really understanding what are those potential areas that may be causing, financial stress. Yeah. And eventually, once you have that plotted out and you understand your financial performance over time, then you're getting into financial projections. Generally, you want to have at least a 1-year outlook when it comes to projections. But I've seen many times where, a company creates a projection and you see the classic, hockey stick curve where revenues all of a sudden, go up. You see, historically, times when you have, trying to think of the terminology here, gross margin. You might have gross margin where, say, you're at 25%, but all of a sudden you have a projection where it jumps to 30. So I guess the reason I would really encourage companies to analyze historic trends, because that knowledge can then be brought forward to make a realistic projection going forward.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think again, the clients that I've worked with in the last 10 years, and I know you work with large enterprise, it's been my experience that the vast majority of businesses are generating less than a 3% net profit. And then you actually start to, ask them or push them on, are you taking a fair market salary, right? Are you accounting for this expense, that expense? And once we start to add that, into the mix, we recognize that they're either like barely breaking even or unfortunately in a deficit position. I think this is why 2 weeks into COVID, we saw the collapse that we did because the net profit wasn't there. So I love what you're suggesting with respect to that historical performance. I love to call it the highways and the hazards, right? What was working, what was not working, like what do we need to avoid or what do we need to, rebuild if we need to do that. So so far we our process, that's the one thing I do that, we're in line with. And now you take it into a whole different stratosphere by actually now doing the what ifs and the projections, right, going forward. So is this then where you would suggest like a cash flow forecast that they can start to now plot their anticipated revenue and anticipated expenses? Is that the first step?
So what I'm referring to is a projection on an income statement level to start.
Oh, still, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And essentially, you want to use that projection as a tool. And so a few comments there. Generally, if you have a year-long projection, you want to have up-to-date financial information comparing to that projection. So every month, ideally, you'd have that projection broken out by month, and every month that you operate and you finalize your financials for that month, you're replacing the projection month with actuals, and you're always doing a comparison of projection to actuals to see, where did the company go wrong? Why were revenues lower than expected? And that is real-time information, and it allows you to keep on top of potential financial issues as they arise. So that's one thing, is a comparison of actuals to projections on a monthly basis. And the other thing I would say is, when you're creating that projection, you want to write out your assumptions. You want detailed assumptions, because if you're estimating an increase in revenue or an improvement in gross margin, you want to have sound reasons why you think that's valid. And getting into management decisions, getting into reporting to financial institutions, having that sound projection with solid assumptions is very important.
Okay, and so what I just want to reiterate there, because I believe it's super important. Everything's super important. But for the founder, we're going to take the projection, we're going to build the projection, and then we're going to replace that month of projections with the actuals. So we see how everything gets impacted at the end of the year. What is this going to look like? And do we need to pivot, or do we need to make some adjustments based on the projections that we have for the months going forward, but the months that we're actually experiencing in the present?
Yes, that's as you operate, you want real, I guess at a point in time, you want to see where you are compared to your original projection.
Beautiful.
And back to, drafting the projection, and this is what you were alluding to earlier. This is where you can start to have some fun with your projection and start looking at scenario analysis. So, you may look at, your scenario analysis may look at different triggers to say, okay, what if I experienced a 5 or 10 or 15% drop in revenue this particular year? What would
or
that
80
do?
with COVID?
What would that do to my gross margin? What would that do to my profit margin as well? Yeah. And then you work down the line. What if you lost a key customer? What if you have economic dependence on one large customer and that customer walked away? You could see a much larger decrease in revenue. And so you want to see the impacts of those. You can do the same thing with direct expenses. So if prices go up, charged by a key supplier, how does that impact your gross margin and bottom line? You can keep it at a more high level and just play with the gross margin percentage. That may be an easier way to look at alternatives. And then don't forget about overheads as well. So you might have a sound gross margin, but if your place of business, if your rent's going up, payroll is always going up. People, you have to pay people well to keep them. So often your payroll increases over time. So really understanding where those costs are going, or where your revenue projections are going, and potential increases or decreases to those, I think is beneficial to understand what sort of scenarios you might be facing in an upcoming year. And COVID is a prime example, right? You have, in January of 2020, no one really thought that we would see the impacts that we have on company performance due to COVID and the related, restrictions.
Yeah. Well, I have to, I smiled there. I had a little chuckle because you were talking about how it starts to get fun. And I can appreciate that because I love numbers. And I think it is true. I know a lot of founders are like, what do you mean fun? Numbers fun doesn't, it doesn't commute. But I think to your point, once you get the work done of getting the numbers in there, just even making sense of your numbers between either your notice to readers or whatever, is happening in your accounting system where you can start to break out some of these revenue streams. Once you get the numbers in to the cash flow, and we are going to download, or we've made available, it's in the show notes, is a cash flow template. So that's there for you. So now there's no excuses, founders who are watching and listening. But once you get the numbers in, Neil, to your point, it does, it's very easy for you to actually then say, okay, well, what if revenue was to drop off? What if this revenue went up, but these products went down? What if we created a hybrid of product and service and started to, kind of rejig our actual revenue model on that line? So it becomes really easy for you to run these scenarios. And
I'll just add there, the key to scenario testing is not the doomsday scenario of what's going to happen to my business if revenues drop 20%. It's really understanding the levers you have available. So if your revenue drops 20%, what options are available to you? Do you have, options to improve pricing strategy, to make your pricing more, aligned with market? Can you diversify to remove some economic dependence on one big or large customer? You can get into overhead expenses. Often overhead is related to, rent or payroll, which are two large expense items.
Yeah.
But understanding what levers you might have available, you might be able to, hate to say it, but, make your operation a little bit leaner, or have the option to do that if one of those scenarios were to come into fruition.
Right.
So it's about planning.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the levers are probably endless. I think about equipment, right? I think about a lot of founders where their equipment isn't 100% utilized right now, even 80%, it might be sitting at 30 or 40, and they've got the carrying costs on that, and they're not doing anything with it. I think you bring up a really good point though too, just on the human capital side of things. And with the scenario testing is understanding the, the CEBA, the Canadian Emergency Business Account, right? And accessing those funds, accessing the wage subsidies, and putting that in there, and then understanding the impact of that and potentially how to then utilize that cash, how to best utilize that cash versus just taking it in. And we had an interesting conversation around that money, it being a loan, right? We're not entirely sure if promissory or personal guarantees are attached to it or not. But yeah, it's our responsibility to make sound decisions with that money that's coming in.
Right. Yeah. The CEBA is a loan, and portion of it is forgivable, but it's a loan that will eventually need to be repaid. And you may make a good point around the emergency wage subsidy. If that subsidy is being collected, understand what operations would look like if it wasn't collected. That's a great example of a scenario analysis. And the reason I think this is such a valuable process, you have historical trends, you have a projection that you can update, monthly with actuals as your operations move forward, but you can also analyze through that Excel workbook impact that these scenarios have on key financial ratios.